Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Hello, everybody. Welcome another edition of Learn Photography with Duck. I am your host, Duck, and today's session is a general Q&A. So we're gonna talk about a couple things first. I gotten a lot of requests based on last week's lesson regarding layers in Photoshop. So I'm kind of holding off answering those until the next Photoshop session, unless today people just don't have any general questions, and then we can go ahead and jump in on that. Just so you know, but the regular Q&A session, I like to kind of reserve it to answer all those questions that you have about your camera gear, about lighting, about, anything other than Lightroom or Photoshop, because we do have those two sessions specifically for Lightroom and Photoshop at the beginning of the month. All right. The second thing I want to mention is a little bit of a sad news. I just learned this from Peter, and I went on Facebook to double check. But those of you in my neck of the woods may be familiar with a photographer by the name of John Koss. He is very active with Milford Photo Group. He's attended quite a few of the meetups that are held by Milford Photo. And I just learned that he passed away this past weekend. So my condolences to his family and friends who are grieving his loss. He was a great guy. So if you know him, just be aware he did pass away, and you might want to send your condolences as well. So nothing like starting on a little bit of a sad note. But anyhow.
What did he die from, Doug?
I have no idea. All they said on the website was that he passed away. No further information. I'm sure something will come to light as the family releases more information. So just out of respect, I'm not going to go poking around and asking. So, all right. Anyhow.
Just lost you, Doc. Yeah, Doc, we lost your volume, and I guess we lost your image, too.
Oh, that's weird.
Oh, you're back.
Okay. All right. I got to make sure I'm still recording. Okay, good. When something's going to go wrong, it's always going to go wrong, no matter what. So anyhow, today, other news. Not next Monday, but the last Monday in February, I'm going to be doing a special Patreon-only Zoom session here. So if you are a Patreon member, you will be receiving an invitation to that session. And what we're going to be discussing in that session is pricing your photography. Now, I understand a lot of you are not in it to make money. You're not in it, as a business. However, I know some of you do like to sell your photo services from time to time, and or sell your photography from time to time. So what I'd like to do is, for those of you who are interested in that subject matter, I'm going to be doing a special Patreon-only session on pricing your photography for sale, whether it's for a client or for yourself. Okay, so there's incentive. If you're not a Patreon member, please feel free to become a Patreon. I appreciate the support. And that being said, I want to welcome Don Janelle and Tabitha Sahadi. I hope I pronounced that right. who just became new supporters of Learn Photography with Duck. I appreciate you guys. And the rest of you Patreon supporters, I really do appreciate the support. All right, so that being said, let's go ahead and open it up to general questions that you may have about your photography. Maybe something's hanging you up, or you just can't seem to find an answer. So hit me up. Who's got questions?
I'll start you with one.
Okay.
Focusing on a moving subject. If it's something big, easy. Most cameras today will track real well. You can put it in continuous focus. You can put a focus point on the subject. If it's an elephant, it's really easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're focusing on a person walking toward you or across your frame, I've done it multiple ways. I've tried to pre-focus on a point that I know they'll cross, but that's not always easy to get them when they hit that point. And if you're focusing on a person, I usually try to put the focus point on their eye to get the sharpest picture of their face.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do? I mean, there's a couple of ways of doing it. I've experimented. I can get it to work, but it's not an easy thing. There are some things I do with photography that are second nature. Moving subjects, when it's a person, a football game or something, a lot of action, a lot of things.
Right.
You can focus on someone's eyeball.
Okay, so there's quite a bit there. You mentioned the pre-focusing in a spot where the subject's going to cross. This is a very typical technique that a lot of street photographers use. So I don't know if that's the situation that you're encountering.
To be honest, either outdoors or even in the studio. I've done shots in a studio where I'll have somebody walking toward me or across the frame. And I'll try to put it on a tripod and pre-focus, because without a tripod, if I even move around, I've lost that sharpness that I'm looking for on the face.
Right. Okay. What aperture do you like to shoot at?
I'm a big subscriber to the old F8 is great.
Okay. Good.
Unless it's a portrait or something.
Yeah.
But I like F8, F11.
Okay. All right. Because that is one consideration when you're trying to get that really sharp focus. If your aperture is too far open, you have a very, very thin field of focus, and the slight difference of, depending on how far away from your subject is, the difference of a few inches can make or break that image. All right. At F8, F11, you have a lot more leeway. So you shouldn't have too many problems. Okay. There's a couple of things that come into play. One is concerning your field of focus. And the other one has to deal with the actual mechanics of the camera. Okay. So most cameras have a focal point that you can assign. All right. And depending on how new the camera is, it could have, anywhere from 7 to 9 to 60 focal points. And you can tell the camera how you want to use those focal points. You can say, hey, I want you to keep it on a single point. I want you to keep it to a small cluster, or I want you to, make your best guess. Okay. And I find that if you use the automatic feature of a lot of the modern cameras, they tend to pull focus. All right, they understand like center of mass of the subject. As long as the subject is isolated enough from anything around it. Okay? But even within that, it tends to focus on whatever is closest to the camera. All right. So if somebody's holding their hand out in front of them like this, the camera may pick up on the hand and focus on that rather than the face, because that's the closest thing to the camera within the, mass of a subject. So that becomes a physical aspect of the camera mechanics. And the way you overcome that is, instead of using the camera to make the decision, you have to make the decision. And for that purpose, I prefer using center point focus. All right. And they call it center point focus, but you can actually move that focus point around your view screen depending on what you're photographing. And typically the way you would use it is you would focus on the, like in this case, instead of focusing on the hand, you'll focus on the face. You'll focus, lock focus, and then compose your shot to the way you want it framed for your shot. And it tends to be a lot of half click, full click, half click, full click, half click, full click. All right, in order to gain focus, then recompose. Focus, recompose.
For what it's worth, I back button focus.
Okay.
So it's a little easier than kind of hold the button half down, but it's more the focus and recompose that gets me into trouble with a moving subject.
Yeah.
Because even in F8, I mean, if I focus on your eye, your shirt might not be sharply in focus. It's inches matter.
Yes. Yes. But again, it depends on how close you are to the camera. And we'll get to that explanation in a little bit. All right. But you mentioned back button focus, and I'm a big fan of back button focus. And for those of you who do not know what back button focus is, a lot of the modern cameras have all kinds of dials and buttons. And a lot of those buttons, you can assign specific functions. All right. I should probably grab my camera. But on the back where your thumb is, all right, on you got your shutter button, all right, but where your thumb is, there's usually 2 or 3 buttons. It'll be 3 buttons and, or 2 buttons and a dial, depending on the type of camera you have. And one of those buttons will probably be labeled AF, which stands for autofocus. Okay. And a lot of times when it comes from the factory, that button is not set up for autofocus. It's set up for probably something else. You have to go into the menu and say, hey, I want to assign focus to this back button. And at the same time, what I suggest is take the focus off the shutter button and leave the shutter to just metering. All right, activating your light meter. And what that does is you can now use your back button as you're aiming at your subject. You're going to press that back button to lock the focus. And once you take your thumb off that button, that focus is not going to change no matter how many times you press that shutter. All right, because the shutter is no longer controlling the focus. All right. Now, that being said, you can also tell your camera how you want to focus, whether it's focus, lock, and then disengage, or focus and continue focusing because the subject may be moving. All right, which is sometimes referred to as tracking focus. And usually if you're dealing with, active subjects, a lot of, wildlife photographers will use this. They will put it on continuous focus because they know that subject's going to be moving. The thing with that is that you have to make sure you always have your back button focus pressed and that your focus point is on the subject. So obviously, if you have your focus in the center, that means your subject will always have to be in the center. So what I suggest is figure out what your composition is going to be, and then shift your focus to the 2/3, either left or right, and then keep it there, so that way you don't have to travel too far to maintain your composition and your focus point on your subject. All right. Now, certain subjects like birds in flight, or even some, running animals, or even running grandchildren, at that point, maybe you'll want to hand over the focus to your camera and let the AI, kind of track that body mass for focus. But for that, when you release a certain amount of duties to your camera, you're going to have to make concessions and give up certain things. And that may be getting that critical sharp focus on the eye. All right. Unless, of course, you have one of the newfangled, brand new, modern cameras that have eye focus. All right. That will actually, it recognizes that it's a face. It looks for the closest eye, and it tracks that eye and uses it as the focal point. And let me tell you, I've seen some of these cameras with that eye focus. Fantastic. They're amazing. But for us with, older cameras, we got to do it the old-fashioned way and do it ourselves. Okay. All right. So that's the mechanical aspect of the camera, making sure that you have your focus points set up properly. And you have, your quadrant set up for either 2/3 or center, or however you want to shoot.
Would you recommend a single focus point, or would you recommend going to like a cluster of 3 or a cluster of 5?
Yeah, I prefer the single point, because I want to place that focal point on the person's eye. All right. Or if they're a little bit further away, at least on their face. All right. When you're using, that matrix focusing, the camera's going to want to focus on whatever it registers first. All right. So if they're turned sideways, it may catch the shoulder before it catches the face, and what I find is it's not consistent. You may take 6 shots, 5 of them are focused on the shoulder, that 1 is focused on the face. Obviously, that's a very poor ratio of success, 1 out of 6. I'd rather have 6 out of 6 or 5 out of 6, but 1 out of 6, that's a very poor ratio for me. So I'd rather have a little bit more control over that, and I will place my my focal point on where I want to focus. All right.
I have a question about the tracking feature.
Yep.
Now, if I go into the menus and set up my tracking a certain way, I take my single point focus on the person's face or their eye. They start moving across the screen. If I'm holding my back button, it's going to continue to track, right, without me moving?
Depends on the camera. Some for those, you have to kind of use that matrix. All right, and then it will adjust that matrix wherever it is within your composition. But if you have set it to being 2/3 to the right, it will always be in that 2/3 to the right. So you have to make sure that you place that focal point and track it on your subject as you're following. All right. You can't just sit there and say, all right, no matter where it is within that frame, it's going to find it, because it won't. You actually have to, track it yourself. So at that point, you're the guidance system. Okay.
Doc.
Yeah.
I either have, I should get the camera. Either regular AI servo, which I never use, or
Right.
AI focus. I will use AI focus. Case in point, the New Haven road race on Labor Day. People are coming towards me, so I will focus on the guy and shoot several pictures. And of course, as he's coming towards me, it's refocusing.
Yes.
Because I'm doing AI focus.
Yeah, so AI focus for the Canon shooters is kind of like that matrix. It finds that mass, that subject mass, and uses that. AI servo, it uses whatever point you select. And then, of course, the regular focus point is what it is. You have to...
If you have an older Rebel, like when I do hikes and stuff like that, I'm not taking my best camera. I'm taking this old Rebel. I read someplace that the older Rebels, only the center has the best focus.
Yes. All right. So if we get a little bit nitty gritty here, there are there's three types. There's two types of focal points. All right. You can say three, but two of them are similar, just different orientations. There's what is called a cross point. There's a horizontal, and then there's a vertical. All right. And the way back in the day, the way we always determined focus was with a prism, and it was two little pieces of glass that diffracted light slightly differently depending on where the focal point was. And what you had to do was find some edge on your subject, okay? And like, for example, if I were to use the edge of my shirt against the white of the softbox back there, all right, the prism, if it was out of focus, you would see a shift in that line. It won't be a straight line. It'd be a shift. All right. And then when you focus, it would bring the two prisms together. Okay. And when it lined up, you knew you were in focus. Okay. So the new technology, not quite the same, but in principle, we can think of it as the same. So the horizontal focal points does this on a horizontal split. The vertical does the same thing on a vertical split. And of course, the cross does it both horizontally and vertically. And the biggest thing, as cameras got better and better and better, all right, like Bill mentioned, earlier cameras had a cross focus as the primary center point, and then it would have horizontals on the side and verticals along the top and bottom. And as the technology got better, all right, because obviously it takes some engineering to get that cross focus. As the engineering got better, as technology got better, they started implementing further and further out from the center. And now we have cameras that are almost all cross focus points. So that will help. The other thing that helps, now that you understand that aspect of it, what the camera is looking for to pull focus is contrast on the edges where those focal points are. So you want to find a strong contrast. So like the white to black here, the white to black. If you can put a focus point on that contrast edge, your camera's going to find that focus a lot faster. All right. On the eyes, well, you want to, if you're close enough, you want to use the pupil or some of the lines of the eye to create that contrast for the camera to pull focus on. If the texture and the pattern or your subject is too close in tone, it has a very low contrast, your camera's going to have a hard time finding the focus because it's looking for that contrast edge. All right. So that's the other equation that you got to consider if you're having a hard time focusing. Make sure you find something on your subject that has a lot of contrast and focus on that. Okay. And then the last thing about focus, of course, has to do with your aperture, and shutter speed. And we'll get to that in a second. But aperture,
I like to do, Duck.
Yeah.
I like to do 5.6 because I'm walking all over the place, and everybody is not always in the same plane. And I'm using because I'm traveling light, I'm using a lens that goes from 118 to 135, so it's not that critical as far as focus. So I like to use 5.6.
Yeah, but when we start talking about aperture settings, you have to understand that your aperture settings is an artistic choice. It's very subjective, all right? There is a certain amount of, I don't want to say math, because it's really not, it's mathematically based, but we're not thinking, math when we're at the moment, capturing an image. But we have to understand some of the math behind what the camera is doing. And you have to understand that your depth of focus is the amount of the image quality that is rendered as looking sharp to our eyes based on a certain viewing distance. All right. That viewing distance tends to be about an arm's length. Okay. From whatever we're viewing, whether it's a screen or, something hanging on a wall. Okay. And that sharp plane of focus is going to be whatever we're focusing on. So in the case of taking a photo of a person, if we focus on the eye, where the eye sits and everything parallel to that will be your sharpest focus. And then from there, it's going to degrade towards the camera and degrade towards the horizon. Okay. And it's going to degrade very, very quickly as far as sharpness. So it gets blurrier. Anything in front of that focal plane gets blurrier towards the camera and towards the background. And it degrades faster towards the camera. All right, because you got to think you're typically a lot closer from the camera to the subject than the subject is to infinity. Okay? So depending on your aperture will determine how much in front of and behind our plane of focus we perceive to be sharp. All right. Obviously, the sharpest point is going to be right where the focal point is, and it gets softer and softer and softer. But we don't perceive that softening right away. All right. So like, for example, shooting at f11, if we focus on the tip of the nose, we may not notice any noticeable difference in focus to the ear. But if we place a person behind, at that point, we'll notice that the person behind is just a little out of focus. Okay? So you have to understand this depth of focus, and you have to choose it appropriately to your whatever it is that you're shooting. All right. Now, obviously, like I said before, it's a very subjective measure. All right. Some people like having the eye in sharp focus and the ear going a little bit soft, so they'll shoot at 2.8 for a portrait. Okay. Bill says he likes shooting at 5.6. Pete likes shooting at f8. That's my go-to is f8. But, there are times where I kind of like that, softening, so I might bring it down to 2.8. All right. So, but these things are artistic decisions. Okay. And at that point, you have to say to yourself, I know that certain things are not going to be in focus, and I have to be okay with it. All right. And at that point, you as the photographer now have to say, okay, whoever's looking at my image their eye is going to go to the areas of sharpest focus first. So what do I want to show them? All right. So I'm going to make sure that if it's a person, I'm focusing on their eye. All right. And I'm going to take my time, make sure I lock focus before I press the shutter. Now, the issue here is if the subject is moving. When the subject is moving, we have another setting that we have to take into consideration, and that's our shutter speed. All right, because when a subject is moving, they are traveling through our focal plane. All right, so they may move out of the area that's in sharp focus into an area that's not quite so sharp. All right, so that's problem number one. Problem number two has to do with time. If the shutter is open the whole time they're moving, they're going to be registered on your sensor, and the result is going to be a blur because of movement, not necessarily because of focus plane. All right. So you have to make sure that you're shooting a moving subject at a fast enough shutter speed that the shutter is not going to create the blur. All right. So what I find is with people who have trouble with focus on a moving object, it tends to be the shutter speed over their aperture choice that is the focus killer. All right. Because you have to realize you're on the scene. All right. There's you're shooting your dog playing in the backyard, and it's very active and it's running all over the place. All right. And you're locking your focus on them as they're moving around. All right. And you're taking a picture and you look at it and it's soft. All right. And you might say to yourself, I don't think I have enough depth of field here because, I focused on him because he was moving. I don't think it locked focus well enough. So maybe I got to increase my depth of field. So because it's moving, I know that if I increase my depth of field, I'll be able to get it. Well, unfortunately, if you don't take consideration that they're actually moving through the whole time period that your shutter is open to the light, that's going to create the blur. So what I suggest next time is increase your shutter speed, shoot at the aperture that you want, but increase your shutter speed, and you should get better results. All right. So anyhow, there was a lot to unpack there. There's a lot that goes into focus. It's not just the focusing servos. It all interplays with your aperture, with your shutter, and with your lens. All right, you have to understand that the narrower your field of view, the more accentuated that movement's going to be. All right. Do you guys understand what I mean by parallax? All right. I'll give you an example. You're in your car. You're driving on the highway. You're going 60 miles an hour. All right. You look out your side window and you see the Jersey barriers. All right. And you see the cars on the opposite lane. And then beyond that, you see some trees. And then beyond that, you see a mountain. Okay. As you're driving, that Jersey barrier is going like this. All right. The cars on the opposite side are going like this. All right. The trees beyond that are going like this. But at the mountain, all the way in the back, is going like this. All right. That's parallax. The further we are from a moving object, the slower it's going to appear to move relative to our movement. Okay? So when you understand that, you have to take into consideration your subject that is moving. How close is it to you? The closer it is to you, the faster it's going to appear to move across your lens. All right. So if you're having a little bit of hard time getting focus, all right, if the subject is within, your immediate vicinity, consider maybe stepping back and giving yourself some room to move. All right. Because if they're too close, you're going to be doing a lot of this. All right. And no matter what, you're never going to get a, tack sharp image. Okay. If you give yourself a little bit of distance, you give yourself a little bit of a heads up, all right? And you're able to then move a little bit slower with your camera, okay? Because now what you have to do is, because you are stationary and the subject is moving, all right, you now have to track that subject, all right? And the further it is away from you, the easier it is for you to track. All right. So if you ever want to test this for yourself, get yourself two lenses, a zoom lens and a wide angle lens. All right. And stand at the curb and put your wide angle lens. And as a car goes by, try to get a picture of them directly in front of you, tack sharp. All right. It's going to be impossible. Put the zoom lens on, back up, and then track the same, vehicles going across from a distance, and you're going to find that it becomes a lot easier to track and lock and get good focus. Okay, just because of that parallax difference. All right, so there's a lot, obviously. Hopefully, I answered your question. I gave you something to chew on. Okay,
that statement about wait a minute, that statement regarding using standing back using a zoom lens. You're talking about going across, like at Lime Rock. What about if we're talking about hikers coming towards me?
Okay, coming towards you is actually a lot easier to track. I find that for me, it works best if I just focus every single time. Press and focus, press and focus, press and focus. All right.
That's what I do.
Yeah. Rather than tracking, because when you're using the AI, the tracking, there's a little bit of a delay, and it depends on how fast they're coming towards you. Okay. And Bill, you probably experienced this. When the hikers are 100 yards away, it seems like it takes forever for them to get within a good shooting distance. Once they're in your good shooting distance, you got to be quick. Otherwise, they're right past you. They're not traveling any faster or slower. All right. But that speed difference, it just seems like once they're right there, you got to be quick. Otherwise, they're past you in a second. It's like, wait a minute. Here, they were 100 meters away. I was like this, waiting for them. As soon as they got into visual range, it's like I didn't even have time to put the camera up before they were past me. All right, that's that. It's. I think there's a term, time dilation or something like that. It's all physics stuff, but that's the issues that we have to deal with. All right. So giving yourself a little bit of distance, using a telephoto lens to reach across that distance will give you better results. All right. Doesn't mean it can't be done. All right. If you use a wider angle lens and wait for them to get on top of you, you need to make sure that your shutter speed is appropriate. All right. And you may need to double or triple your shutter speed to your focal length. Okay.
What gets challenging in the woods is it's dark in the woods, especially if it's a dark day, especially if it's not sunny. I prefer it not to be sunny because when it is sunny, half of a face is overshot and the other half is dark shadow. But the challenge is people are coming towards you. So there have been times I have put the ISO up to 800.
Yep. Oh, that's low. Piece of cake.
Oh, okay. I 16. Yeah, you know what? Yeah. I can do 1600 because if it's in the woods and if it's a little grainy, who cares? Because it is in the woods.
Yes.
Who cares?
That's right. That's right.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel about night photography too. If it's grainy, it's dark out.
Yeah.
Go with it.
Well, not only that, but there's ways of combating that grain nowadays in post. But it's funny because when I first got into digital, my first digital camera was a 6 megapixel camera. All right. Very, very lousy with, low light photography. And the noise was horrendous. All right. And of course, the adage back then was you want to shoot at its native ISO as much as possible. And that got hammered into my brain. And so as I moved forward and got better and better and better cameras, I still had that old mentality, shoot ISO 100, shoot ISO 100, shoot ISO 100, okay? But as I started getting more comfortable with photography, I realized, wait a minute, when I had my film camera, I didn't always shoot at ISO 100. Most of the time, I shoot at ISO 400. That was my go-to ISO. And if I wanted to do anything at night, I threw in a roll of 800. So why am I stuck in this ISO 100 with my digital camera? It made no sense to me. All right. And it's because, all these pundits, keep your noise level down, shoot at 100. All right. And I very quickly realized that, no, I'm missing out on a lot of photos that I could be taking rather than say, I can't because I can't shoot at ISO 100. I'd rather get the shot, even if it's grainy, than not get it. All right. Fortunately, now I can shoot at 800 and you'll never notice a difference. But
for my wildlife, when I go out wildlife, I'm at auto ISO. So depending on the lighting conditions, I can be down at 100 or up at 6400 or higher.
Yep.
It all depends. I'm after that shot. I don't care what the rest of it is.
Exactly.
Well, Roman, he's he does a lot of bird nature and does a lot of stuff, and he's been in Connecticut quite a few times the last few years. He says for bird photography, ISO of 800.
Yeah, because with anything else, you have to understand the framework within what you're shooting. All right. Now, Pete mentioned studio shots. All right. Wanting to make sure you got focus within the studio. All right. In the studio, you have a lot of control. All right. And Pete, not to jump on your case, but there really should be no reason why you can't get good focus within a studio, even if the subject is moving, unless they're jumping all over the place, At that case, well, first of all, what is your situation when you're shooting in a studio? Are you using continuous lights? Are you using flash? What's the situation that's giving you these focus problems?
I don't like continuous lights. I'm using strobes, and it's not I'm using strobes at low power, so they're probably going off at 4,000 or 8,000 to the second. It's not the strobes. They'll stop a speeding bullet. I'm using an 85 millimeter lens probably 90% of the time in the studio.
Okay.
I may be 15, 18 feet from the subject. It's more that, and it could be me, that I'm so used to back button focus with the single focus point. I'll move it over the face. By the time I move it over the face and recompose, the person has taken another step. And
Okay.
Added that depth of field. The depth of field with an 85 millimeter lens at 15 feet isn't as much as we might think, if you're looking for sharp focus.
Right. Now,
and the other thing, I'm sorry, but the other thing is even trying the pre-focus. It's almost harder in the studio because you're looking at a seamless backdrop. You pre-focus. It's not always easy to know when the person has reached that point that you pre-focused on. I've had like somebody, maybe someone else is there at the shoot, and I'll have them say, "Oh, they reached the point and hit the shutter." I mean, I've known guys that will profess or propose that you should even lock up the mirror, put the camera on a tripod because the delay for the mirror ticking up.
I'd argue that the time difference is.
It's work, and I'm sure there's an easier way.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, so what I normally do is I'll have my subject stand or hold their hand at the place where I want to find focus. All right. And I'll focus there. And because I use back button focus, I don't have to worry about, turning the lens to manual focus. All right. So I'll focus on their hand. All right. And I'll place a piece of tape on the floor at that focal point. Okay. And then I'll ask my model to always land on that piece of tape. All right. So they now have a marker to aim for. All right. Where I know that, 6 inches forward and back, they're going to be, tack sharp. Okay. Now, obviously, you got to account for human error. If they miss their mark for some reason. So within a studio environment, you have the luxury of pulling up the image. I don't know. Do you shoot tethered?
I don't like shooting tethered because of a mistake that I made. I had someone trip on a tether cable once and take my camera to the floor, and luckily there was a thick carpet.
Okay.
Or I would have cried for days. So I stopped shooting tethered. It's got some great advantages, but that case of someone tripping on the tether cable,
okay,
turned me off.
I'll have to share a DIY that I made some years ago with an IKEA wire dish rack. I made a shelf for my tripod that held my laptop. So that way there weren't cables all over the place. Everything was right there on my tripod. All right. But
you keep it close to you when you're shooting.
And yeah, so the laptop and the camera are all on the same structure. There's no tripping over cables in that respect. All right. You have your power cable, but at least that one can quick disconnect. So, but anyhow.
Have you tried one of the wireless tethers like a Cam Ranger?
They're slow.
That's what I was afraid of.
Yeah. So, in that respect, it's great because you don't have the cable, but the way I've used it in the past is I will shoot 4, 5, 6 frames, pause, and then check. All right. So because by the time I've gone to the 6th frame, hopefully that first frame is coming in, and then I can check and make my adjustments. But I've gotten to the point in my studio, I keep my shooting station very close to the camera so that I don't, and nobody's going to walk in between. All right. I don't allow that. I make sure I have a clear path around all my equipment that, the model can move to. Anybody else doesn't need to be there. They're always going to be behind me. Okay. But that's a different story. All right. But the thing is, all right, when you're using flash, you're a little bit, pun intended, tethered to your shutter speed. You can't go above your sync speed. All right. At that point, like you said, if you have set your lights properly and you have, none of the ambient light affecting your image, then the flash is going to stop the action. And at that point, the only thing you need to consider is your depth of field. All right. So if they are moving, depending on the type of action, I've had models where they are implying movement without really moving through their space. All right. So they can be, walking in step to give the illusion of them walking. All right. Without them actually traveling too far out of my focal range. All right. Now, if you're shooting like a dancer where they're moving, give them a target. All right. Tell them, I want you to execute that move on this piece of tape. All right. And I find, I don't think I've ever come across anybody who can't do that, whether they're trained or untrained. Most people can hit a mark on the floor. And, you double check and make sure you got your focus, and then, move on from there. But in the studio, you should have, there's no real reason why you shouldn't get, good focus, unless there's something else going on that I'm not aware of. So, okay.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
I use that button to autofocus, but when I try to recompose, I can't press the shutter. I press the back button, and the lens does move. I can see it focus, and then whenever I try to recompose, I can't, click the shutter. But if I press it, then I can click it.
Do you have the focus turned off on your shutter?
What do you mean? Focus turned off?
All right. So typically when the camera comes in factory fresh, you press your shutter speed halfway, it will focus. And then you press it the rest of the way, it'll take the picture. Right? When you set your back button focus, you can tell your back button, whenever I press it, you're going to lock focus. Okay? Once it's locked, you can remove your thumb off the back button, and that focus is not going to move. All right, then at that point, if you press...
Oh, lost you again, Doc.
For some reason, my microphone keeps turning off every so often, and I don't understand what's causing that. All right. And if you don't disable the autofocus on your shutter, all right, the camera is going to assume that you want to refocus. All right. So it's not going to take the picture right away. All right. Because if you still have focus activated on that shutter button, it's expecting to focus. And if you go too fast, it's going to say, oh, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't focus. You're moving too fast for me. And it's going to stall out and not let you take the picture. So I would check that first.
And the other question I have,
with back button focus, just by pushing the back button doesn't achieve focus. You have to look in the viewfinder and make sure that the little, I've got a Nikon 850, and I'll get a circle that tells me I've achieved focus.
Yeah.
Once you achieve focus, you should be able to push the shutter. But simply pressing that back button doesn't guarantee that you've achieved focus, and the shutter won't let you take the picture until the camera's achieved focus.
Or that setting is disabled in the menu.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous thing to disable though.
No,
Well,
because there are...
I have a 750.
Here again with my bird.
I do see the circle. I do see the circle that is focused. But then when I try to move the camera, when I try to press the shutter,
you're out of focus in a dark room that you're in. You just went from
no, but
something that
it does it all the time.
I checked your menu.
Yeah,
that's on the menu. Because I with my. Go ahead.
Okay, I can. Yeah, look into that. But the other question I have is, when do you do exposure comp?
Exposure compensation?
Yeah.
Typically, that is used if you have some form of automatic setting on your camera. So the way exposure compensation works is you are handing a certain part of finding proper exposure to your camera. All right, whether it's aperture priority, shutter priority, or full auto. Okay? If the camera is determining the exposure, you can override that setting. All right? So for example, I want to take a picture here. All right? And I want to make sure that my subject is properly lit. So I will get exposure for, maybe the white shirt or whatever, all right? And I'll take the picture, all right? And the camera says, well, based on this scene, all right, because that is white, all right, I'm seeing that as being very bright. I want to change that white shirt to gray because it's too bright. All right. And I look at it and the image is underexposed because it wants to change, the camera wants to change this white shirt to gray because everything wants to be 18% gray. All right. So I says, no. That's not what I want. I want that shirt to be white. So in order to get it white, I need to compensate for what the camera does by overexposing, because I want to go from gray to white. I want to make it brighter. I'm going to overexpose this by maybe 2/3 of a stop. So I will use my exposure compensation and I'll go plus 2/3, take the same shot, and now it's adding 2/3 of a stop to the exposure. And then at that point, I should have a proper exposure.
Or your background is blown out, but your subject is fine.
Right. Yeah, that's a great scenario. All right. If you have a subject that's backlit and you aim the camera and you take a photo, all of a sudden they're a silhouette. All right. And you say, well, that sucks because I didn't want my subject to be a silhouette. I want my subject to be properly exposed. All right. But no matter what, the camera's always going to say, no, 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 no. I have to underexpose it because look at all this light behind. And I says, well, I don't care about the light behind. Let's make that light even brighter because I want to bring my shadows up. So I'm going to add light to my shadows. So at this point, I'm going to say, okay, the camera wants to turn my subject into a silhouette. All right, make it dark. I want to add 2 stops of light to that silhouette. So I'm going to use my exposure compensation. I'm going to go up +2, take the same shot, and now I'm going to find that, yeah, my background has blown out incredibly, but my subject is now looking a lot better because there's more light on the subject. Okay, so that's how you use exposure compensation. And of course, you can do it the other way around by removing light. Does that answer your question, Carol? Awesome. Good question. Any other questions I can help people with? Greg, come on. I know you got to have some questions.
Yeah, I'm here in the background because I was in and out of the room a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I do have kind of a question. I don't know if this is going to sound, well, nothing silly, but I tried to photograph a waterfall last week on my own, and it was one of these things where you had ice on the sides, but you had the moving water, and it was fairly long waterfall. So, I don't know. I thought it was going to be rather simple, but in the end, I wasn't really sure I liked what I did.
Okay.
So I guess part of it is maybe just a variety of questions, like, which part, I'm trying to get like a scene that's pleasant, but I don't know like which part I want to focus on. And then, of course, preferred settings, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that kind of thing.
Waterfalls are very, very tough because you have exposures that tend to be all over the place. Yeah. Right? Actually, I think I have a waterfall photo here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Share and desktop. Whoa, let's get all right, here we go. Okay, so here's a typical waterfall. Okay. And one of the let's put myself here. All right, so one of the issues is your exposure. There we go. One of the issues is your exposure. All right. You have a sky that is very, very bright. You have a ground plane that is very, very dark. All right. And you have water that's cascading. All right. That you're trying to kind of sort of get soft, but it's reflecting a lot of light back. So this tends to be very, very bright. All right. So we have exposures that are all over the place. And then on top of that, we have to find a combination of settings within the camera that will give us the artistic rendition that we want for the waterfall. So typically, most people like that smooth, kind of like silky flowing water effect over waterfalls because it really, it highlights a waterfall really, really nicely, right? Although I do know some photographers that like to freeze the water in a waterfall. All right, so we have to find some balance between our contrasty sky, contrasty light on the foreground, and getting that silky smooth look. Okay, most people, all right, if when they approach this, the ideal situation is to have some kind of graduated neutral density filter, where the top of the filter is darker than the bottom. All right, the bottom usually is transparent, and the top is tinted, kind of like sunglasses. All right, and what you do is you slide the filter in front of your lens, and what it does is it helps, just like sunglasses, it helps cut out all that brightness in the sky. All right, so that less light is hitting the sensor from the sky, allowing you to balance the sky and the ground a little bit better. Okay?
Well, Doc, can I stop you?
Sure.
Because the situation I'll be in, probably it's this time of year it's different. Because you're kind of like down a hill, and your all your light's pretty much blocked because of all the forest and everything.
Okay.
So you've got, and a lot of times it's not even that sunny when I've gone. So you've got just not really harsh lighting. You've got, kind of a one kind of lighting, I would say. It's not very harsh though. So it's just, you've got the ice on the side. And you've got the water in the
If you can avoid the harsh sky, that's even better.
Yes.
But whether you're showing sky or not, you're still going to run into very similar situations. All right. So the other concern is slowing your shutter down slow enough to get that silky effect. All right. And the rule of thumb that I give people is look for the longest part of the waterfall. All right. And, just kind of like visualize that you dropped a ping pong ball at the top of the waterfall, and you're going to follow it with your eyes till it gets to the bottom of the waterfall. All right. And as it travels down, you're going to count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000s. All right. And that will tell you, it'll give you a rough estimate of what your shutter speed should be. Okay. So if it's 1 second, if it's 2 seconds, usually, somewhere around that time frame works well. Then at that point, you need to get your proper exposure for the waterfall, right? And it often means stopping down to, F11, F16, somewhere in that vicinity, all right? Unless you are disciplined enough to go there in the early morning, or wait until late evening when the ambient light is a little bit more neutral. Okay, that would be the best. Okay, but most people don't have that luxury. They'll go midday. All right, so to get your shutter speed, you're just going to time how long it takes that water to travel down that waterfall. All right, and that will guarantee you're going to get that nice, soft, silky water. Okay. Now, the trick becomes finding the proper exposure. All right. Sometimes we cannot control how bright the sun is on our scene, and we may not be able to get a very, very slow shutter speed that we want. At that point, you have to think to yourself, okay, do I have the skills in Photoshop to be able to fake it in Photoshop. And then at that point, you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to shoot this the way I'm comfortable getting the exposure, without having to figure out all these sacrifices. But I'm going to take 20 shots. I'm going to put my camera on a tripod. I'm going to take 20 images, just click, 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 get 20 of them. And then when I get back, I'm going to open up 20 images into one file, and I'm going to use blend modes to create that silky water effect. It can be done. That's an option. All right. So that's what you need to kind of wrestle with yourself is like, do I have the technical skills to get that waterfall? All right. If the answer is no, can I get to the waterfalls where I don't have to worry about my technical skills? All right. That's either early in the morning or later in the evening. All right. And then that way I can get the proper exposure with a nice long shutter speed, and I don't have to worry about, exposure blending. I don't have to worry about doing anything in Photoshop other than making it look pretty. Okay. If the answer is no, you can't get to it in the morning or in the late evening, then, consider taking 20 shots and learning how to do an exposure blend in Photoshop. Okay.
Yeah. But can I say something?
Yeah.
If I'm in the situation where I'm in this forest and it's really not that sunny, and this time of year anyways, the sun is not intense, I don't really have to worry about the time of day so much.
Right.
My question is that I guess maybe I'm trying to get a pleasing photo, and I'm not sure exactly what I want to focus on.
Okay. So
that's another part of it.
yeah. Okay. So what do you consider as a pleasing photo? What is your definition of pleasing photo?
I don't know entirely. I know before when I've done some things, people have said, well, you're focusing on too much of an area, maybe. I mean, that was somebody's comment in a camera club, but I mean, that's, an opinion of a judge, I guess. But
there's a ton of stuff. I mean, you could I put on a telephoto zoom and done a 400 millimeters in a waterfall. On a tripod, 10 seconds. I've used a wide angle 16 millimeter on a waterfall, on a different waterfall, and take a bunch of pictures like Doug said. Just if you're on a tripod, move that tripod, just swivel that tripod around a little bit, or that ball head, and take different angles of the same waterfall. Lots of times you don't get your first shot of the composition first shot anyway.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of variables. So, I mean, I use the slow shutter speed. My ISO is about 50, and then f-stop is whatever I want, either wide open or closed down. And then from there, I adjust my shutter speed depending on what I want, how silky I want that water.
Yeah, but we're all talking about exposure and freezing the motion of water. It sounds like the gentleman that asked the question was kind of asking more about composition.
Yeah, that's where I'm getting the feeling it's more compositional. All right, so here is some basic guidelines to keep in your back pocket. All right, and I teach this to everybody when we go out on photo walks. All right, there are 3 main views you should consider when you're aiming your camera. All right. Wide, medium, and close up. Wide, medium, and close up. All right. If you remember those 3, all you got to do is apply it to whatever it is that you're looking at. Okay? So you come across the waterfall and it says, okay, let me look at this waterfall with my wide eyes. All right? And you got to say, okay, within this wide range, what is of interest? Is there enough interest to make a compelling image? If the answer is no, then you say to yourself, well, wide shot's not going to work. All right. So, all these trees on the left and all the trees on the right, they're really not adding to the scene. So let's crop that out. I'll go to a medium shot. All right. So now I'm concentrating more on the waterfall and maybe some of the rocks below it. Okay. And then you ask yourself, is what I'm looking at make a compelling image? Take a shot, look at it, analyze it. Okay. If the answer is no, then you says, okay, maybe I can find something to focus in close on. All right. That'll give me something compelling to look at. Right. And then maybe pick a piece of rock that's got some moss on it, or a floating twig, or a branch with berries on it, or something that you can close in on and have the waterfalls behind. All right. And then ask yourself, is this a compelling image? All right. So every scene that you go through, it's always going to be the first part is discovery. Okay. You as a photographer are looking for the picture there. All right. And this is where a lot of beginners have a hard time getting the concept, because they think, oh, the picture should present itself and I'm just going to record it. It doesn't quite work that way. All right. You have to find the image within the scene. All right. And oftentimes, when we approach a scene, we have all these images that we've seen in the past by other photographers to judge by. So we tend to default to what we know. All right. Well, I saw, Joe Schumacher do a waterfall this way, so I'm going to replicate it. That's fine. It's a great way to start. But once you start, explore it. All right. And what I always tell people is rely on that viewfinder. Look at that scene in your camera and then ask yourself the hard questions. Is what I am looking at interesting? All right. Now, this presents a bit of a problem because we as photographers, we as artists, we tend to be emotional about our images, all right? Because we're also influenced by the experience of being on location, that it's often difficult to disassociate with ourselves from the image and look at it a little bit more objectively rather than subjectively, okay? So if we can separate ourselves just enough to say, all right, if somebody was looking at this image, would I be boring them or will I be giving them something to go wow over? All right. And be honest with yourself. All right. And if the answer is, yeah, I'm bored. All right. Well, if I'm bored, I know everybody else is looking at my image is either going to be bored or too polite to say they're bored and give me some thumbs up, which is, worst case scenario. All right. So you got to ask yourself, how can I make this a little bit more compelling? And then, like I don't know who it was that said, Alan, I think said, you have to explore the scene. You have to see what is there that you can capture. All right. And it means moving around and framing and adjusting and zooming in and zooming out, Maybe take 3 steps to the left and 3 steps to the right and see if there's something there. All right. You can't be lazy about it and just walk up and says, there's my view, click, there's my shot, I'm happy with it. No, So there are compositional rules, all right? And typically with landscapes is that you want one tangible, one thing to be your subject, okay? And oftentimes what the subject is may not be what you initially think. So here you are, you're walking up to the waterfall, all right? And you say, there's my subject, this beautiful waterfall in front of me, okay? The problem is waterfalls, everybody's seen waterfalls, okay? How many photos of the Southford Falls have you seen? How many photos of Kent Falls, Bashbish Falls, all right?
Yeah.
They're
Wadsworth. It gets a little boring after a while.
Exactly. So imagine we as photographers being bored with somebody else's photographs of waterfalls. Why would we want to replicate that? All right. So in that case, we need to find something of interest that we can use as our subject matter with this beautiful fall as a background to set the mood, okay? And it could be a moss-covered rock. It could be, maybe, you get a little creative and there's, a slick rock that's all wet and glistening, and you use artistic license and you get, a nice oak leaf that's got beautiful fall colors, and you place it on there and you use that as your main focus point, and then you place the waterfalls behind it and you get a more compelling composition. Okay. Some people will argue, well, that's cheating because that's not how nature, placed it. All right. Hey, you know what? You're an artist. Okay. You're not a documentarian as a landscape photographer. You are an artist. Okay. Get over it. So that's what I would suggest to you, Greg, is really, stretch yourself out of your comfort zone and really explore through that lens, through that viewfinder.
Yeah. I think like when I get there, I'm going to have to see what it looks like, because you don't know exactly what you want to do until you get there. Too many different factors. Yeah.
So I had a young guy in my studio. He rented my studio for a photo shoot, and he's not very comfortable shooting flash. All right. So he was shooting his model, and I set up the lights for him, and I made sure that his exposure, was set. So all he had to do was press the shutter. All right. So that aspect was taken off of his shoulders. Okay. But because he's new, he's, exploring photography as a beginner, he was like a mile a minute with the shutter. All right. Taking pictures of this girl. All right. And I was watching that he would take 4, 5, 6 frames of the model without any changes whatsoever between exposures. All right. Now I say that because that's what I find with a lot of beginning photographers, is that they tend to rush things. They tend to think, well, as long as I am generating images, I am creating something, which is the totally wrong way to look at creating images. All right. The last thing you do to create an image is press your shutter. All right, that's the final thing. But there's a lot of steps before you press that shutter that goes into creating an image. All right, and that is getting your composition. All right, finding something of interest. All right, so what I would suggest to you, Greg, is when you get to the falls, all right, the first thing I would do is don't unpack your camera. Walk around. All right, take a look at the waterfall from a few different angles. All right, do this if you have to. All right, close one eye and say, okay, you know, there's one possible composition. Walk around, you know, do this. All right, it seems silly, okay, but what you're doing is you're not concentrating on the gear. You're not concentrating on the exposure. You're not concentrating on your focal length. None of that. All you're doing is focusing on your subject and trying to determine what the best angle of view is that will make a compelling image. All right? And because you're not encumbered by holding up a camera and a lens, you can get low, you can get high, all right? You can move a lot faster unencumbered with a camera than you can with your gear all set up, okay? So get to the waterfall, take your time, walk around, all right? Survey the situation, think wide, medium, close up, all right? See if you can find your images. All right, walk around and then just make some mental notes. I got one here. I got one here. I got one here. I got one here. All right. Once you're happy with, 3, 4, 5 different perspectives from different locations, at that point, set up your camera. All right. And work on that first composition. Get it looking right. Take your first shot, look at it, analyze it, and then try to be a little objective about it. Take a step back and say, okay, what is wrong with this image? All right? What is wrong? Don't look at what's right about it. Look at what is wrong with the image and then correct for what is wrong. And then eventually you will get that perfect image. Okay? So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. I think I'm going to look at it a little bit differently rather than trying to shoot the whole waterfall, because that probably is a little boring and maybe not really all that interesting.
Yep. Yeah, and you know what? Digital film is cheap. Okay? So you take a wide shot, you look at it, it says, okay, do I like what I see? All right? If you go, it's not the shot. All right? Get in tighter. Do I like what I see? Still not doing it for me. All right? Get in shot. Get low. All right? Put more of the groundwork between you and the waterfalls. All right? Yeah. That usually tends to work. All right? See if you can find some leading lines. Okay? See if you can find some alternating angles. All right? See if you can find where the waterfall comes in from the right and then does a bounce and cascades in from the left. All right? And concentrate on that shift. All right? Make something of interest, within that line shift. Okay? Look at textures. All right? Textures, contrasting textures really, really does a lot to create an interesting composition. All right? And that's the problem with the wide shots of a waterfall is the textures tend to be all the same. All right? When you step back from a waterfall, the texture of the trees and the texture of the rocks sometimes blend together. All right? That doesn't create any interest. All right? See if you can break up that texture and create some contrast. Okay?
Okay. And have fun.
And have fun, yes. It's all about the exploration.
And the picture is not maybe as important in the beginning, is what you're saying. I was going there with the camera ready to start it, and that's the wrong way to approach it. So I think that was helpful that you said that.
I bet you both Alan and Bill can back me up on this. There have been times where I've gone to meetups and come back with 3 or 4 images. But I was okay because I had a great time.
Yep. Boston, right, Alan?
Boston and even Norwich.
Oh, no, yeah.
Norwich,
yeah.
yes. Norwich, yeah. And I got to eat some goodies.
Yep. Sometimes the trip is more important than the voyage is more important than the destination.
Yes.
So, all right.
All right.
Anybody?
I have a question. I have a question for Alan. Your background with Zoom, sometimes chroma key doesn't work that well. Yours looks almost professional. What are you doing there?
It's just a virtual background, Bill. I don't have a green screen or anything else up.
Really?
Is your background?
My headset is throwing it off a little bit.
Is your background fairly flat and even?
No, it's my virtual.
No, I know, but your actual physical behind you, are you against like a blank wall? Yeah, that helps.
For the most part.
Yeah, that tends to help.
There's a couch back there, but you can't see it.
Wow, I'm surprised. That's a good job. Nice.
Anyway, that's all it is, Bill. There's nothing special on mine.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Bonnie's been kind of quiet. So, Mark, anything? You good?
I just want to get past all this COVID.
Yeah.
Can I say the word shit?
Yeah.
I just did. It's like, I'm a little tired of Zoom meetings. I mean, it was a nice novelty at first because I did this, because of my background. And we used to do this at work. And I would have my glass of wine here, and it was like, hey, I got my wine. I don't have to drive any place. But now it's a little bit, okay, it's been a year. It's not like 3 weeks on. And
Cool. All right, guys. Well, if nobody's got any further questions, I guess we can wrap it up. All right. So no Zoom next month. Next Monday. Yeah. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. Are you doing? What are you doing for lessons these days? Mostly Zoom, right?
Right now, because of COVID, mostly Zoom. All right. We are anticipating, as spring comes, we are anticipating that restrictions are going to let up, especially now that the vaccine has been making its rounds. Obviously, it's starting with the most critical people in the population. Right now, the state of Connecticut is releasing it in 3 stages. 75 and older is stage 1, with critical care, health caregivers being in that group as well. Once that's done, they're going to open it up. I think it's age 61 to 75. And then stage 3 will be 18 to 61. So that'll be the bulk of the population. When do we get to stage 3? I have no clue. I don't know if they have an anticipated schedule for that, but the last I checked with the state of Connecticut, that was their plan. Whether it changes down the road, who knows? All right. Obviously, one of the problems is they are encountering a shortage of vaccines now It's not being manufactured as quickly as they are hoping for. So we'll see. But we are anticipating of doing outdoor events in the spring. And Robert and I are working on getting an outdoor event in downtown New Haven once the weather warms up. So we will be doing something live and in a group environment outdoors for spring. So yes.
But what's that though? That's not. You mean, oh, that's like something different than this? You mean?
Yeah, it'll. What we are planning is off-camera flash workshop. We don't have any details yet. You know, we just kind of toss it out and it says, "Yeah, let's do it." We haven't hammered anything out yet, so you're actually getting a pre workshop heads up on it. But you know, that's just what's in the pipelines right now. I would like to get something else going myself. You know, so we'll see how it goes. But right now, because of COVID, you know, everything is hinging on what the regulations are. You know, so. But at least, you know, the first and second Mondays is all Photoshop and Lightroom. So, you know, that is easy to do on Zoom, you know. So, okay.
I may talk to you sometime off the camera here, and if I want to do something like privately, Zoom or...
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. So,
okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, guys. As always, I hope it was educational. I hope you guys walked away learning something.
Thanks, Doug. This was good.
All right, guys. Be safe. And like I said, not next Monday, but the first Monday in February, we're back to Lightroom. So if... get your Lightroom questions ahead of time. And for actually, while I got you guys here, let me pull up something. I had two people, actually Mark and Colleen, both want me to go a little bit deeper into Photoshop layers and masking, and in particular, when to use very specific layers. So we will delve even deeper into what we did last Monday in February, okay?
Good.
All righty, guys.
Thanks, Doc.
So actually, while I got you here, Mark, and Colleen's not here, if you have a specific image that you're having problems with and you want to send me the raw file, you know, I'll be more than happy to do a live edit with your image. That way you can see, you know, how I go about it. That sometimes helps. All right. So feel free to send me.
Okay. I can tell Colleen that too, actually, if you want, because I talk to her a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
Send you a live image to
Yes, if she sends me a raw image, I can, you know, and then have her explain what it is that she's trying to accomplish with the image. I can do a live edit in February. So, you know, when I'm working on your image, it puts it a little bit more in context, and sometimes the connections are made a little bit easier as to what to use when. So. Okay.
Yep.
All righty, guys. Be safe.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.